It's a privilege to welcome to our series our next guest, Audette Exel AO, Chair and Founder of Adara Group. Audette, thank you so much for your time this morning. Privilege, as I said, to have you on the program.
Delighted to be here. Thanks for offering to have me come and have a chat to you.
Thank you so much. Let's start from the start, if we could. Born in New Zealand in the south, but raised in the north in the 1960s. Tell us a little bit about your background and your childhood, if you could.
Yeah, very proud Kiwi. I only became an Australian last year, so I'm a proud Kiwazi now. Raised of incredibly good people. My dad was a journalist, my mum was a brilliant secretary, and they're people who taught me and taught their kids, you know, what matters in life is what you give, not what you take, and above all, respect everybody. So I grew up in a country deep in values, never worrying about education or healthcare, or was I going to be safe, or was there going to be enough food, and surrounded by beautiful nature. So, you know, really that start in life has, you know, laid the groundwork for me for everything that unfolded, and I'm deeply grateful for it.
And also spent a lot of time, as I understand it, in Singapore in your later years. Tell us a little bit about the transition between New Zealand and Singapore.
Yeah, absolutely. So that as a kid, my dad was working for NZPA, Vietnam War was happening. So it was, I think, quite a profound influence on me. We were up there for a few years, and I think being a kid in such a multicultural place as Singapore, Asia in the 60s, right, was just such an incredible gift in my life. I profoundly remember coming back to New Zealand and standing in a schoolyard, astonished that all the kids in the school looked like me. And so I think it sort of deeply set in me a sense of, well, first of all, what it feels like to be the odd one out, you know, as the little blondie with the blue eyes in wonderful Asia in the 60s. But secondly, this just love of language, culture and diversity, and Asia in particular. And as an adult, I went on to live in Hong Kong for a period, and I've always felt very, very drawn there. So yes, it was a wonderful opportunity as a kid to be exposed to a wider world than just New Zealand.
Let's fast forward to 1980 and you enrol in an arts and law degree at the Victoria University of Wellington in New Zealand. Tell us a little bit about your experiences at university, originally at New Zealand, and then you found yourself in Melbourne of all places.
Yes, I mean, two totally different universities, right? So varsity, as we call it in New Zealand, I was a sort of troublemaking activist. I studied law and arts. I wanted to be an officer of the court. I was very involved in the anti-apartheid movement, the feminist movement. I was a mad keen skydiver in those days, so, you know, it was a truly wonderful life for a young woman. And university in New Zealand was rich. It was rich in people and diversity. I was paid by the state $23 a week to go to university. There were no university fees, enough money to pay my rent or pay for food. And so as a result of that structure, university was full of people who thought differently. So that first 3 years really set me up. Then I came across to Australia to jump as a rookie skydiver in the Australian National Parachute Champs, busted up my knee and ended up having to stay and finish my law degree, and I'd finished the arts degree by then, finished the law degree at Melbourne University. Blue blood. Kids who drove to school in their own cars. I was cleaning office buildings and hotels to pay my way through university in New Zealand, and I did that in Australia too, once I literally and figuratively got on my feet. But the contrast between the two universities and the experience was another of those pivotal moments of thinking for me, because I realised there was an entire world, the world of power and capital and people of advantage that I really didn't know about. And so that kind of added to the layers of my thinking and set me up, if you like, for what came next.
I have to ask, skydiving, what was that all about?
I jumped for years, 15 years, jumped all over the world, jumped on the Hong Kong team. It's counterculture. Taught me a lot about, and I still am a jumper. I still look at the clouds and wonder, you know, how fast the wind's moving, and think about what it feels like to sit in the door of a plane before you get out with some of your best mates. I just loved that part of my life and those people. And it also taught me a lot about stepping outside the stream, the mainstream. You know, people think you're a bit crazy if you're jumping out of airplanes on the weekend, but actually what you see as counterculture is wonderful, and taking risk, as long as you take it in a measured way, kind of enhances your life. And so, you know, for all those years of jumping, you know, it has enhanced my life beyond measure. And I very occasionally think, although I know I'm too old and my reaction speeds aren't fast enough, gee, I wouldn't mind, you know, being in the door of an aeroplane and in the sky right now. So yeah, it was a great part of my life. Risk taking is something that I've never been afraid of, but I'm pretty good at managing it too.
By 1984, you complete your undergraduate and postgraduate law degrees, and so begins the start of your executive career, working as a solicitor in Sydney. What happened next?
Yes, well, I decided to move out of human rights, social justice, officer of the court into, oh my God, I need to learn about power and capital. So I'm going to find who's the best at that in Australia, and sort of stepped out of my tribe, if you like, put makeup on for the first time in my life, put down my placards and decided I'm going to go learn business. Horrified my tribe. But for me, fabulous learning journey and into a world that was very new to me, but also that revealed to me how prejudiced I'd been. I was standing on one side of the fence and not understanding how much value and intellect and contribution there could be on the other side. And in fact, as my life has unfolded, it's really been all about understanding that if you stand on a mountain throwing stones at somebody, you can affect change that way, but there's another great way to affect change, which is to engage. And Adara, which we'll talk about, our tagline is Bridging Worlds, and the start for me of Bridging Worlds was the step into Allen's, into business, and then from there it unfolded. Once you're in those places, away you go. So then it was Linklaters in Hong Kong, and then it was banking in Bermuda. It all sort of unfolded from there. But at all times for me, thinking about how do I use this power, capital, intellect, knowledge and understanding to affect change? How do I bridge that divide in a small way to manifest that belief? But yeah, Alan's, that was an amazing time to be a young woman and a young lawyer in the 80s. And I'm still very good friends with many of those Alan's partners, and lucky that I was in that firm for sure.
You referenced your stint in Hong Kong there with Linklaters, which I think was around about 1987. How did you end up in Hong Kong, and what were your experiences there?
Oh, Hong Kong was so great. And of course now we watch what's happening in Hong Kong, and I guess it's the same with everybody, right? Wherever you've lived, you sort of can smell it forever. So as an experience, being in the heart of Asia before the changeover, sitting on the bottom of China, as China was awakening, if you like. How did I get there? Alan's basically opened the door for me to go to Linklaters because I told him I wanted to work overseas. And I also had a very lucky meeting with a brilliant Linklaters partner, so he helped. What was the experience like? Transformative in terms of, being a young woman in her 20s who suddenly finds herself in the big wide world, working really hard, but every weekend, oh, we're going to Taipei this weekend, or let's go to India, or let's go to the Philippines. Hong Kong is the centre. And another place where I still have very dear friends and a lot of my heart. And having watched Hong Kong now from that time through the handover into the change, and now obviously really struggling with holding on to one country, two systems. It's been a fascinating journey, and it's a place that I'll always love for sure.
What's your reading or gauge on the situation in Hong Kong at the moment?
I think there's huge complexity. I think it's interesting. I think in a way, what's the struggle in Hong Kong epitomises a struggle that we're seeing in other places in the world and we have for millennia, which is that people who have a form of economic freedom will not tolerate for a long period of time any form of oppression to their freedom. And so the Hong Kong people are enormously pragmatic, but they have lived a very economically free life. And I think the generation that's come through, the globally inspired digital youngsters have been looking at their life and, the umbrella revolution that happened and saying, we want something different to what the party has in mind for us. And so that struggle is important and it's real and it's very, very complicated in terms of how that's going to unfold for Hong Kong society. And we see some of the same issues. We see that obviously in different ways in Iran, for instance, at the moment. We're seeing complexity in China with the COVID zero piece, but also a sort of sense of, what people ultimately yearn for is the right, not necessarily to have a democratic vote, but the right to choose the course of their life. And I think that that's a struggle that people have in common. You can only stand on people's head for so long, is my view, until at some point they say, this is enough for me now, and I'm either going to stand up for my own rights and I'm prepared to lay my life down for them, or I'll stand up for the rights of my children. You saw that in South Africa. It's heartbreaking to see Hong Kong go through that struggle, and I think the picture is going to unfold from here. I don't believe in the binary discussion of what's going on in China. The bad guy, the good guy, the West, we're all perfect. China, they're not. It's not that simple. There's all sorts of shades of grey in that, but the evolution of a society of the size of China, including Hong Kong, towards a form of economic and ultimately wider forms of freedom, oh my goodness, that's a complicated journey. And it's only just beginning to play out, I think. So all China watchers, I think, are watching. We all love that part of the world and that country.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but by the late 1980s, you became somewhat of a specialist in international finance, which then led you in 1992 to Bermuda. Tell us about transition.
Yeah, that sounds a bit mad, doesn't it? So, and I don't know that I'd ever call myself a specialist in just about anything, but I did work in focused way for acting for banks with Linklaters in doing sort of global and international finance. Bermuda actually, the connection there came because of, firstly, Hong Kong. Prior to the changeover, more than half of the Hong Kong Stock Exchange effectively re-domiciled its non-Hong Kong based assets into Bermuda. So if you're doing deals with the listed Hong Kong companies, you were doing work through Bermuda, and I actually ended up going to Bermuda to close a deal when I was in Hong Kong as a young lawyer at Linklaters, actually acting for the banks against Alan Bond, infamous Australian. And I went to Bermuda to close this complicated global deal in relation to Bond's involvement in Chile. And I walked around the island and I thought, wow, this place is the world's best kept business secret. The largest reinsurance market in the world, huge number of people doing business there, but very, very high quality, OECD whitelist, very tight controls on capital. And so I sort of bookmarked it in my head as this place is interesting. I then took a couple of years off and travelled for quite a period of that on a push bike, and at the end of that realised, gee, I'm never going to be a Linklaters man and I'm never going to be an Allen's man. What am I going to do next? I think I might go to Bermuda, which is how I ended up there. So it was a bit of a circuitous route. I guess a lot of my life is like that, but certainly the Hong Kong connection took me there. And Bermuda was a wonderful home. I was there for 14 years. I thought I'd be there for a couple. It's an hour and a half away from New York. It's 6 hours away from the UK. It's the largest reinsurance market in the world. Some very, very smart people. Deeply warm culture of Bermudians, particularly black Bermudians whose ancestors came in as slaves. Really great people. And you're living on the beach. So I kind of ticked all the boxes. So yeah, Bermuda was a great step for me. A strange step, but a great step.
What's life like there? Because many Australians would know where it is. There's, I think, some high-profile Australians that are based there, or at least their companies are based there. But what's it like actually living there on the ground?
Yeah, I think it's a privilege to live in anyone else's country, right? So I start with that. It's a very international place. So you are in New York every week, or you're in London once a month. You are the markets working between the London market and the New York market and Bermuda. So people do work hard, and the reinsurance market is full of very smart men and women who are doing very complicated work with reinsurance and insurance balance sheets. So the work is interesting. It's a fascinating country in terms of its own history. Division between white Bermudians who came in effectively as pirates in the early days when the British were shipwrecked on Bermuda shore, black Bermudians who were brought in as slaves, and then this expat community, global expat community that sort of interposed in between. I was very lucky in that I ended up running one of Bermuda's 3 banks, and it was the Black Bank of Bermuda. So I had 95% black Bermudian staff, which gave me instant family and a kind of a whole look into that culture and that world. And again, still very close friends with a lot of those people. So I got to live quite a full life in Bermuda and stayed a lot longer than I thought I would. And I joke when I'm in Bermuda that I consider myself to be a Bermudian. They run the business very clean, and the tax haven label I think is a pretty a harsh label to apply to a country that regulates itself to the standard. For the insurance market, for instance, of Solvency II. For the banking market, controls capital flows, no offshore banking or run through the island. So yeah, it's a fascinating place to live. And but as I say, I couldn't believe I stayed that long, but it'll always have a piece of my heart.
You referred to it there. By 1983, you were appointed Managing Director of Bermuda Commercial Bank at the age of 30, one of the, possibly still the youngest female in the world to ever run a commercial bank. Tell us about your appointment to that position.
If I look at my life and when I look at other people's lives, sometimes doors open, and if you are lucky enough to be courageous and leap through them, things can unfold for you. So a door opened for me. I actually had the bank. It was a publicly traded bank that had a block of shares, a controlling block owned by Barclays. It was, as I said, the black bank in Bermuda, had a really deep connection to black Bermudian society as it desegregated. So I was incredibly impressive history. Barclays had sort of done nothing with it, run it into the ground, and then announced that they were going to sell their block. And so I had just arrived on the island and was working as a lawyer, and I sort of went on this slightly crazy one-woman mission to find someone to buy the Barclays stake, because I believed the bank was really important, and I also believed it was a huge business opportunity. So I did find this very controversial character and brilliant man, actually, to buy that block of shares, and I did the legal work for him. I negotiated the deal with Barclays, and on the night we had the closing dinner, he basically sat me down and said, "You talked me into buying this tin pot bank, so now you can run it," and which was a bit of a shock. But again, one of those doors that open where you decide, okay, the door's open, I'm going to step through. Huge learning experience, and took me from providing advice to balance sheets as a lawyer to actually being responsible for one, which is a fantastic step if you get the chance. And to do it as a young woman, the great thing about being young is you have to respect everybody who works for you, including the guy who opens the doors, because they know more than you do. And so I was able, I think by virtue of the fact that I was young, to sort of build a really participative management style and team, and unleash people who, because they'd had a whole bunch of old guys from Barclays sitting on their head, had not been unleashed. And people are magnificent. And that team in there, when I got in there, they were totally magnificent. And so I was able to kind of ride their ability and their skills to turn the bank around, and it was just a fantastic experience.
Clearly that was one of the components, one of the major components in turning the bank around. I'm also interested what were the other components. You grew market share, you grew profitability. I think the bank had $2.6 billion of funds under management at the time. You grew that to around about $4.5 to $5 billion. How did you go about restructuring?
Yeah, we were the best performing bank on the stock exchange. Simple, good, old-fashioned business, right? Figure out how you differentiate yourself. Do what you do really, really well. Great service to customers. We had the world's largest reinsurance market on our doorstep. Global payments. It was the name of the game. The other banks were pretty damn useless, quite frankly. So, all we had to do was do the work a wee bit better than them and explain to our potential customers what it was that we could offer to them. So, differentiation, great service, and a completely engaged team is a really good recipe for any business. Not necessarily a guarantee. And then having the passion to throw yourself at it, with belief and purpose. And that team, he's so proud to be part of building that bank, and that people believed that they could do it. And so yeah, I'm proud to have been a part of that, and they're still going strong. And we were the best performing bank on the Bermuda Stock Exchange pretty quickly. It's a small local exchange. It's a big listing exchange, global listing exchange, but a little exchange, but we were pretty proud of what we did. But there's no complexity in any of that, or in a lot of business. It's just a very simple formula, right? But it taught me a lot. Taught me a lot about asset liability management. Taught me a lot about managing teams and the power of unleashing people. And it was that next step for me in terms of thinking about what I could do in the world, if you like.
During this period, you also became chair of the Bermuda Stock Exchange, and you also sat on the board of the Bermuda Monetary Authority. Take us inside some of those positions and the exposure that it gave you.
The Stock Exchange chair the heads of the banks always rotated the chair of the Stock Exchange. I remember a really funny cocktail party where me and the two guys that were running the other banks were standing and receiving line, shaking people's hands. and everybody who came through seemed to believe that I was the wife of one of the two guys. So it was I think I was an unexpected CEO and chair of the stock exchange, but it was another piece of learning, right? How does the market trade, and how does the domestic market trade? How does the listing market trade? I went on the board of the Monetary Authority after I stepped down from running the bank, when I was setting Adara up, and that was also, that poacher turned gamekeeper thing, where you suddenly get to look inside a regulator. I chaired the investment committee for the BMA, and I was on the board for quite a long time, and they regulated not only the banks and the financial services sector, but the reinsurance and insurance market more broadly. And so, and I did that for quite a few years actually, and that was another sort of piece of learning, to put yourself into the head of how a regulator thinks, to look at how important it is when you're a small country, Bermuda, I always say it's like the little engine that could, to regulate yourself really well, particularly when there's such a push against offshore. So being inside that world and looking at things slightly differently was a great experience, as was the exchange.
So 3 years at BCB, when you reflect on that today, proudest achievements, what would they be?
Working with that team. It's all about the people, right? There's a great Maori saying in New Zealand, that what is it that matters most in the world? Te tangata, te tangata, te tangata. It's the people, it's the people, it's the people. And that is true for my life. So being part of, standing with a team of people who were unleashed in a way where, their brilliance was properly rewarded. The bank stood proud on its own 2 feet. We're the first bank in Bermuda, used to be in Bermuda, and this is a form of social control, which, to the conversation about how important fair financial services are, mortgages in Bermuda were always at call. And so if you stepped out of line and caused trouble against the governing, sort of power brokers, you always had this fear, and the black Bermuda community really had this fear, your mortgage is going to be pulled. We were the first bank in Bermuda to change that up. And so people's mortgages were not at risk as long as they were not in default. Little things like that. I feel really proud of being part of, the little engine that stood up and roared, if you like. There are a lot of great moments.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but between you leaving BCB in '96 and then Adara Partners in '98, there was essentially a gap year of quite a lot of travel in 1997. What informed your thinking, and what were some of the experiences alongside those travels?
Yeah, when I stepped down from the bank, it was sort of one of those moments in life, an early midlife crisis. But I knew that I was going to, I'd had this learning, and I'd always had this passion around, I'm going to use this learning to affect social change, but I wasn't sure how. But I knew after I'd been running the bank for a few years, it was kind of now or never. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, you feel that. It was like, right, I've been a lawyer in great law firms, I've run a bank, I've chaired the exchange, it's now or never, but I didn't quite know how it was all going to manifest. So I kind of threw my life in at that point and decided I'm going to take time out to really think. So I came home to Australia, walked up and down the beach and thought a lot about what I wanted, who I wanted to be and what I wanted in my life. And I also went on the road. Once I knew I was going to head in a definition of international development, I thought, right, I'm going to go learn. And so I spent time in Nepal walking, just trying to understand how the world of people in poverty and international development worked and whether or not I could be helpful. And I spent time in Uganda. I hired a Jeep and drove around. And so it was like giving yourself a little MBA in international development. It was wonderful. And formulating my thoughts on, right, this is what the next step is going to look like. And I often say to people, give yourself that gift. Life is and I think business life, other people's lives in other sectors too, can be a bit of a treadmill, right? You start and you wake up and go, oh my God, here I am. I'm married, I'm doing this, I've stepped up a career, I've got the house, I've got the mortgage. But actually very rarely do we give ourselves permission to say, if you are able to, take time to really think about who you are and who you want to be. And I've done that a couple of times in my life, and it's been a really good call for me. So that intervening period, without taking that time out, I don't think I could have ever come up with an idea quite as crazy as Adara, and that fit me quite as well as Adara did in terms of the next step.
Let's talk about the launch of Adara Group in 1998. What was the original guiding philosophy?
Fundamental belief that no matter where you're born in the world, you're entitled to essential service delivery. And I've always been enraged, actually, at the terrible inequity in our planet. And I've always been aware that if I was born a little girl anywhere else but New Zealand, my life could have been so different. So first of all came from this passion around injustice and doing something about that. And secondly, came from my belief that you could bridge this divide that we talked about earlier, and that you could use the power of business to generate revenue to affect change. So simple idea, or I thought it was simple, people thought it was absolutely crackers, but simply, I'm going to build a business, I'm going to hire bankers, they're going to go out into the market and they're going to relentlessly make money. But instead of that money going to shareholders, they are going to hand the money over the hall to the man or woman sitting beside them who's going to be an international development specialist and who thinks all day about evidence-based best practice service delivery to people in extreme poverty, and who doesn't have to worry about the money. That was with the idea. And it just made intuitive sense to me, but it was early in the kind of social enterprise era and the impact era. But it was the combination of those two things: a passionate belief in social justice and a belief that there was a slightly different model that we could use if you weren't born of wealth, if you didn't have a stash of cash, if you didn't have a big endowment, where you could use your skills to affect change. So it was a lot of thinking over many years the event, and then the time off that really sort of took me there.
We're now almost 25 years into that journey. How is the group diversified and...
Can't quite believe that, actually. And it's a funny thing to say. Quarter of a century, just getting started. How are we? Where are we now? God, it's been this winding journey, joy and tears. Oh, God, I've made a lot of mistakes. A lot. And it sounds kind of trite, but it's true to say that our successes have come when I've been smart enough to operate as a team member, and the worst mistakes I always made myself alone. But where are we now? And I'm enormously proud of what Adara looks like today. So it is a quite significant global international non-government organisation. We are on a world stage and known as leaders in a couple of things that are really important. So we are amongst the most remote service deliverers in the world, health and education. So to give you a sense of that, our most remote project, 25 days walk from a Nepali road system right up on the Tibetan border. And we have the first thing I ever did up there, or the team ever did up there, was a school. Everybody told me you'll never do good education in remote areas. You won't ever get a teacher up there. It was granted status as a top 5 school in the country a couple of years ago, and it's a centre of excellence. Now there's 20 schools, and there's also wide healthcare up there. So we're really well known for our remote community development, very remote. We're also on a global stage with our work in maternal newborn child health, but more specifically care to tiny wee babies, preemies and low birth weights, and their mums that are born in places without consistent electricity supply. There's a horrendous amount of death in low-income countries for mums and their children, and there's a lot of prematurity because mums are often undernourished and they're doing hard labour work. And same thing, people said to me, don't even try to do facilities-based care in low-resource settings. Best you'll do is get an immunisation in the arm of a kid. I thought that was a complete human rights offence. So those two areas, so the INGO, International Not-for-Profit's pretty well known. It's very deep in its specialty, service delivery and big knowledge sharing pillar now. So we talk relentlessly about our mistakes as well as our successes and try and help others who want to do the same kind of work. And then we started with one business, now we have 2. The second business is a smarter version. If you're an entrepreneur, you always iterate, and I know it drives everyone mad, but I'm constantly iterating. The second business I launched 7 years ago. It's called Adara Partners. Launched it in Australia, and I'm really happy with how that's going, but I'm still iterating. But it's a model where the collective talent of the best advisors in Australia pool together to advise large Australian corporates on very complex matters. And those top advisors, head of Citibank, the chair of Citibank, the chair of Goldman's, the 3 of the heads of Barrenjoey, really senior advisors, they work for Adara without recompense, pro bono. It's pro bono investment banking. And all the fees go to support the work of the INGO. So we're about $72 million in terms of our funding to the work on the ground, and about 22 of that has come directly from the Adara businesses. So 1 in every 3, just short of that, has come out of our businesses, and it's another model And it's a model I'm very much focused now as the world's reopening to get the model into Wall Street.
He won't like me mentioning him, but as I understand it, and you alluded to it there's been two major people in particular behind the scenes that have assisted on the Adara Partners front, and David Gonski AC and Matthew Grounds AM. What sort of influence have they been able to have?
Oh, they're wonderful. I love David and Matthew. I mean, I love them all. So I've had 15. I've just lost one who had to step down because of another conflict with the board, Mike Roche. So there's 14 of them now. All of them have contributed in different ways. There's no question that David Gonski and Matthew Grounds foundational in terms of, and because the model is unusual. So one thing I did get right when I was figuring out how to create this new model, I knew that I had to have the best in the country to give myself a shot at having it work. So I spent quite a lot of time figuring out who were the best and who were the highest integrity and where was that Venn diagram intersection. So Matthew and David sat right in the centre of that. A lot of people told me, senior men in particular in the community in Australia told me I was going to fail. It's always nice when people tell you that, and you can prove them wrong. But I know that when I launched, and Guy Fowler's another one, you know, Guy, Matthew, David, I've known Christian Johnson, Tony Osmond, Alana Atlas, Catherine Brenner, Cynthia Scott, Mike Roche, Tim Burrows has been absolutely legend, ex-chair of Goldman's, Graham Goldsmith, ex-head of ECM, ex-vice chair of Goldman's. I mean, these are brilliant men and women. Having people of that stature backing what we were doing and actually leading our advice work gave me a better than evens chance of success. I remember in the early days somebody said to me when I was out and about trying to explain it, and somebody said to me, God, you've got a good board, Audette. And I said, they're not my bloody board, they're my worker bees. They're the ones running the deals. You know, and you know, how lucky am I? I'm constantly shaking my head that they threw their lot in with me. But one of the things that I had theorised is that they would love it and they would be proud of it. And it's true. They do, and they're emotional about it. Guy Fowler came to Nepal with me. Alana Atlas has been to Nepal with me. You know, they know that their brilliance, when you're an investment banker, you don't often get the chance to know, oh my gosh, if I advise, you know, we're advising Pendle at the moment, we advised AusNet, you know, Macquarie Atlas, we've advised the Commonwealth Bank, we've advised very great companies. They know that when they're giving advice for Adara on these fascinating issues where they're truly, truly specialist, the result of that, the fees that they generate, are directly saving lives of people in low-income countries in a very serious way. And you know, how good does that feel, right? So, so far so good. There's more to come, but I'm feeling pretty good about how Adara Partners is doing.
And what are some of the programs that you're working on or have worked on this year in particular in some of those developing nations?
Thanks for asking that question. The work is really beautiful. Two that I'd really highlight. In the maternal newborn health, we've created, again, you'll see this as a theme, we're really into models. If you do something well in a model, then other people can copy you. So the big piece of our work is what we call Adara Newborn, and it's a multifaceted delivery system to support mums and kids at risk in low-income settings, and it's gained huge traction not only in Uganda, so we're on the National Newborn Steering Committee in Uganda, but in addition to that, in wider settings. So in the developing world, or low-income countries generally are looking at this work now and taking pieces of this work. So the growth of Adara Newborn and that piece, that package, as it spreads out through the country, you know, we're touching 500,000 mums and babies over the course of the next few years, but it's much bigger than that because it's a model. In this last year, one of the things that has amazed me, you know, when you do this work, you work with people of greatness all the time. I'm an endless optimist because I work with people who are truly huge, courageous leaders, health workers working on the ground, Ugandans, Nepalis, the American health team, the Aussies who are here. They have managed to deliver service in the face of horrendous situation with COVID, almost no access to vaccines, massive economic meltdown. At the moment, we're in the middle of an Ebola outbreak and crisis, and yet every single day, hundreds of them are still walking out into the wards, into the fields, into the community to deliver service. So the work is fabulous, but the context has been really hard. And then if I flip across the world in terms of other work, Nepal, the Nepal team in the remote community development, the work that they have done, the learnings they took from COVID. So we launched Nepal's first paediatric COVID ward. We provided safe accommodation for health workers. We went like that. We changed from all the 20 schools we're in, from teaching in school to teaching through the radio, teaching in school in a box, in small groups, outdoors. There was so much change of service delivery in so much complexity, and those teams have taken what they learnt during that time, and now they're building the work in an even better way. So the sort of growth in both those streams of work has been, I think, been outstanding. And I was lucky enough finally to get back to Uganda in July, and it was so beautiful to be there. I have to say, I said to the team, it was emotional after being away from them for 2.5 years, and we just sat on the ground and hugged and cried and talked and laughed and ate and celebrated. And I got to be, and I was out back in the communities. I've been so many times over the last 25 years, but to be back there and see the work expanded, deeper, better, the continuous cycle of, are we doing good enough? Is this excellent enough? Are we providing appropriate service? To see how that had grown during that period when things were so tough and none of us were able to be there to support them, even our global health teams out of Seattle, it just took my breath away, really.
It's easy, given the isolation of Australia, to forget that so many of these things are going on right across the world, in particular in developing countries and nations. How do you get that message out? How do you get more people involved and aware?
Oh, such a good question. It's interesting, isn't it, the paradox of life. So, what should COVID have taught us? We're all connected. What did it teach us? Fear the stranger and shrink to protect ourselves. 200 million more people are going to go into extreme poverty in the next 6 months by UN predictions. 98 million people went into extreme poverty due to COVID. So sometimes when I wonder, I want to yell at people, do you know what's going on? But yelling at people isn't generally very helpful. So, you can, I hope that we inspire people to lift their heads up a little bit. We tell a lot of stories. They meet our teams. We had a lot of our team, our senior Ugandan, Nepali and American teams here. So you try to connect people with their hearts as well as with the facts. But I think we're living through a decade that is going to be written about and talked about for 100 years. And if ever each of us of privilege is called to use our skills to do something great, it's right now. Right? We're living in the face of climate change. We're living in huge economic instability. The world is dividing in many ways, including with wealth and income inequity. And the consequences of those factors, add Ukraine, add the complexity in China, enormous. So if ever there was a time to sort of stand up and reach to be your best, it's right now. And so how do we explain that to people? I think probably the best you can do is kind of try to show people that it's really possible. I'm not a fan of lecturing people, and in our own little way, we're one tiny piece of the puzzle at Adara, but we're out there trying to say to people, hey, you can impact lives, you can influence change, and you can inspire people, to do whatever they're doing in their own corner, so that our part in this decade is to stand on the side of trying to make change, not just to hide from the complexity that's happening. But it's constant frustration.
How do people how can they become involved in the work that you do?
Well, there's lots of ways. Thank you for that very nice question. I appreciate it. We love our donors. So, and because of our businesses, 100 cents in the dollar that anyone gives us go straight into our project work. That's one way, which is great. We love it when corporates approach us who need independent advice, second opinion on mergers and acquisitions, equity capital markets, complex problem solving. So we love our clients. I can provide the best people in Australia working in pairs to advise. So it's not just about the fact that the fees go to good, so people can do business with us. I'm always quietly looking for the next brilliant corporate advisor to join the panel. We keep that very tight, and we only are looking for the best, but people can do that. But more than that, I think people in their own ways can use their own skills, whether it's for Adara or elsewhere, to raise their voice about what is not okay in the planet, to use the platforms they've got, social media platforms and others, traditional media platforms, to speak, to do this kind of interview, and put it out to the world to say, hey, world, there's something we can do. And so there's a million different ways to create change. Adara is just one example of that. So either by connecting with us, any other brilliant not-for-profit, and gee, there are a lot of them, but just in the end, using your mastery for purpose, the best that you possibly can. Every single person can do that.
I thought we'd close off our discussion with a few more general topics. You're also on the board of Westpac. You appointed, I think, from memory, in September of last year. Yep. What are the big issues in the banking sector at the moment?
There are some big issues, right? I mean, the greatness in banking at the moment, I think, is going to be about standing with customers as they go through a very complex time. So, rise in interest rates, rise in inflation, volatility in the markets more generally. There's a feeling, you look at the consumer confidence and what's happening there, of insecurity and lack of confidence. So, I think bankers who are really great bankers are thinking a lot about that. What are my customers experiencing? In addition to that, we've got climate change. What are our customers experiencing here in the floods? I lived through the fires down the south coast in 2019. It was absolutely horrendous. Now it's flooding. So thinking about what's happening every day to our customers and trying to meet their needs with great quality long-term support, financial services support, I think that's one thing that bankers are thinking about. We're obviously all thinking about what's going to happen with interest rates and rolling the dice and playing the guessing game there, and what's going to happen with the markets through volatility. We're looking at, are we going to go into global recessions or depressions? All the economic factors that influence how are SMEs going to operate. We've just seen the failure in the last couple of days of a key company in the supply chain. What's going to happen in supply chain? There's plenty to keep bankers busy at the moment. But, again, it comes back to, this is a great moment. Westpac is a great bank, and I'm very proud to sit on the board. And I think we'll see, Westpac, taking its proper place, looking after its customers, providing great banking services, figuring out how to de-risk banking while looking after our customers, and also figuring out where opportunities are. If you're not thinking about the green revolution and you're a banker, you're in a cupboard somewhere. So, there's a lot of opportunity coming, as well as complex turmoil and risk, but it's not boring, put it that way.
And then in terms of what's next, you've clearly had an extraordinary life, a remarkable career. What's left that you still want to achieve?
Oh, God, tons. I truly mean it, that I really feel Adara is just getting started, and me too. I certainly want to take the Adara model into larger financial markets. I think that could be a great contribution. It should be the most prestigious thing any investment banker does at the top of his or her game, to work on a deal across their competitive boundaries for the best companies in the world, with all proceeds going to vulnerable clients. So I'm really determined about that. I'm thinking a lot about how to use the Adara story, or our public story, to inspire others. I don't know what that really looks like. And of course, I hope I've got decades ahead of supporting the next few generations that are coming up. Having a 25-year background and history now, the sort of lived experience, as people would say, I hope that's useful to the next crop of digital natives and youngsters who believe this kind of thing is possible, but have never actually met people who've done it. And so I think we've got things to do there. We've also got a lot of life to save in the developing world, and I fully intend to be a part of that until I breathe my last breath.
Audette Exel AO, absolute pleasure and privilege, as I mentioned in the opening, having you on the series. Well done on such a remarkable career and such extraordinary achievements. Thanks again for your time.
Thanks, lovely chatting to you.